In the mountains of central China, there is a house that you cannot reach by road. You cannot reach it by helicopter. The only way to get there is to walk along a series of wooden planks bolted into the side of a vertical cliff face, 2,000 meters above the valley floor, with nothing between your feet and the ground below except air. People live there. They carry groceries along those planks. They bring their children home along those planks. And the planks are not new. Some have been there for centuries. In another place, a woman spent 38 years building a mansion without stopping. No architect, no blueprint, no plan of any kind. She built every single day from 1886 until the day she died in 1922. The result is 161 rooms, 40 staircases, and doors that open into solid walls. She never explained why. She never stopped. And in the mountains of Colorado, a single man has spent over 50 years building a castle out of stone and scrap iron. No engineering degree, no construction license, no crew, just one man, a pile of rocks, and a structure that is now over 50 meters tall and still growing. These are not theoretical designs. These are not concept drawings. These are real structures that real people built, lived in, or are still building right now. And in every case, the question is not just how they were built, it is why anyone would build them in the first place. Before we begin, think about this. What is the most extreme place you would be willing to call home? Hold that thought. By the end of this list, your answer might change. Number 10. Monsanto Boulder Houses, Monsanto, Castelo Branco District, Portugal. In the eastern highlands of Portugal, roughly 50 kilometers from the Spanish border, there is a village built not on a hillside, but inside one. The houses of Monsanto are constructed between, beneath, and around enormous granite boulders, some weighing hundreds of tons, that are scattered across the slope of a steep, rocky hill. The boulders are not decorative, they are structural. In many houses, a single granite mass forms the entire roof. In others, boulders serve as walls, floors, or both. Some homes have been built in the narrow gaps between two boulders, using the rock faces on either side as load-bearing walls and adding only a front door and a back wall to create a complete dwelling. According to architectural surveys conducted by the Portuguese Institute for Architectural Heritage, the oldest structures in Monsanto date to the 12th century, though the site has been inhabited since the Paleolithic period. The village's layout was dictated entirely by the placement of the boulders. Streets curve around rocks. Houses are shaped by rocks. The entire settlement conforms to the geology rather than the other way around. The boulders themselves are remnants of a granite batholith, a massive underground formation of igneous rock that was exposed by millions of years of erosion. The individual boulders were separated from the bedrock by freeze-thaw weathering, a process where water seeps into cracks, freezes, expands, and gradually splits the rock apart. The engineering question is not how the houses were built. It is how the builders assessed whether the boulders above their heads were stable. A granite boulder weighing 300 tons balanced on a hillside is subject to gravity, erosion, seismic activity, and the slow processes of weathering that separated it from the bedrock in the first place. The residents of Monsanto built their homes beneath these boulders and trusted that they would not move. They have been right for roughly 800 years, so far. A village where the mountain is the architecture, where the roof of your house is a rock that was placed there by geological forces millions of years before anyone decided to live underneath it. The builders did not move the boulders. They could not. They simply looked at a hillside covered in stones the size of buildings and said, "That will do." Number 9. Dar al-Hajar, Rock Palace, Wadi Dar, Sana'a Governorate, Yemen. Roughly 15 kilometers northwest of the Yemeni capital Sana'a, in a green valley called Wadi Dar, a 5-story palace stands on top of a natural rock pillar that rises roughly 50 meters from the valley floor. The building does not sit beside the pillar. It does not lean against it. It grows out of it. The lower floors are carved directly into the rock. The upper floors are constructed on top, extending the pillar's height with stone walls, arched windows, and decorative plasterwork that make the transition from natural rock to human architecture almost impossible to identify. The palace was built in the 1930s as a summer residence for Imam Yahya, the ruler of the Mutawakkilite Kingdom of Yemen, on the foundations of an older structure dating to the 18th century. According to architectural historian Trevor Marchand, who has studied Yemeni construction traditions extensively, the builders used a technique common in the region but rarely seen at this scale, integrating the natural rock formation into the structural system of the building so that the rock bears the primary load and the constructed walls serve as extensions rather than independent structures. The result is a building that appears to defy gravity. From certain angles, the palace looks like it was balanced on the tip of the pillar. The reality is that the pillar itself is the foundation, and the building is anchored to it at multiple levels. But the visual effect remains startling. The palace contains several floors of reception rooms, living quarters, and a rooftop terrace with views across the entire valley. Water was historically delivered to the upper floors through a system of channels carved into the rock from a cistern at the base. The engineering required to provide water pressure to a building 50 meters above the valley floor in an arid climate without electric pumps remains a subject of admiration among hydraulic engineers. A palace that looks like it was placed on a rock pillar by a crane, built by people who had no cranes. The rock does the work. The architecture does the talking. And from the valley floor looking up, the question is not how they built it. It is how they looked at a pillar of rock in the middle of a valley and saw a palace inside it. Number 8. Hanging Temple, Xuankongsi, Datong, Shanxi Province, China. On the western face of Mount Heng, roughly 65 kilometers southeast of the city of Datong in northern China, a wooden temple complex clings to a vertical cliff face roughly 75 meters above the valley floor. It has been there for over 1,500 years. The temple appears to be glued to the rock. From below, the only visible support structures are thin wooden beams extending from holes drilled into the cliff face. The buildings, which include over 40 rooms connected by narrow walkways and staircases, seem to hang in midair, defying every instinct the human brain has about what should and should not remain attached to a vertical surface. According to research published by the Chinese Academy of Architecture, the temple was originally constructed in 491 AD during the Northern Wei dynasty. The builders used a construction method involving horizontal beams inserted deep into holes chiseled into the cliff face. The beams extend outward from the rock and support the floor joists of the temple buildings. The depth of insertion, according to structural analysis, is sufficient to counterbalance the weight of the structures through leverage alone. But the beams are only part of the system. Vertical stilts extend from the beams to the rock ledges below, providing additional support. According to engineers who surveyed the structure in 2012, many of these stilts are not load-bearing at all. They are decorative. They were placed there to make visitors feel more comfortable, to give the visual impression of support where the actual engineering needs none. The temple combines Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian elements, one of the only structures in China to unite all three traditions. Its location on the cliff face was not arbitrary. According to Taoist building principles documented in period texts, the western face of the mountain is shielded from direct sunlight, rain, and snow by the overhang above, which protects the wooden structure from weather damage. The cliff location also places the temple above the floodline of the river below, which has historically risen to heights that would have destroyed a ground-level structure. The builders chose a cliff face because it was the safest place to put a temple. Not the most dramatic, not the most impressive, the safest. 1,500 years later, the temple is still there, hanging from beams that go deep enough into the rock to hold. Decorated with stilts that do nothing, and protected by a stone overhang that keeps the rain off wooden walls that are older than most countries. Number 7. Just Room Enough Island, Alexandria Bay, New York, USA. In the Thousand Islands region of the St. Lawrence River, on the border between New York State and Ontario, Canada, there is an island that measures roughly 306 square meters, roughly the size of a tennis court. On this island, there is a house. The house occupies the entire island. There is no yard, no driveway, no space between the walls and the water. The house is the island, and the island is the house. A single tree grows next to the building. That tree and a small bench are the only things on the island that are not the house itself. The island was purchased in the 1950s by the Sizeland family, who wanted a vacation retreat away from the distractions of the mainland. According to records filed with the town of Alexandria, the family originally purchased a larger island, but found that even that was too accessible and too social. They wanted something smaller. something where the property line was the water line and nothing else existed. To qualify as an island in the Thousand Islands region, a landmass must meet two criteria established by the local governing authority. It must be above water level year-round, and it must support at least one tree. Just Room Enough Island meets both requirements. Barely. The house has windows on all four sides that look directly onto the St. Lawrence River. There is no space to walk around the exterior of the building without stepping into the water. Deliveries arrive by boat. Guests arrive by boat. The garbage leaves by boat. Everything that enters or exits the property does so over water. During high water years, the river rises close enough to the foundation that the island appears to shrink, making the house look as if it is floating. Photographs taken during spring runoff show water lapping at the base of the walls with no visible land between the structure and the river. A family that wanted solitude bought an island and discovered that the only way to guarantee absolute privacy was to build a house that left no room for anyone else to stand. The most extreme expression of wanting to be left alone in the history of residential architecture. No fence required. The river does the job. Number 6. Kotzky Pillar, Chiatura, Imereti region, Georgia. In the limestone hills of western Georgia, roughly 200 kilometers west of the capital Tbilisi, a natural rock pillar rises roughly 40 meters, 131 feet, straight up from the forest floor. The pillar is narrow. The sides are nearly vertical. The top is a flat platform barely large enough for a small structure. On top of the pillar, there is a church, and next to the church, there is a small dwelling. And inside that dwelling, for over 20 years, a single man has lived alone. The pillar was first used by Christian monks as early as the 7th century. According to archaeological surveys conducted by the Georgian National Museum, the remains of a chapel and a hermit's cell were found on the summit during a 1944 expedition. The site was abandoned at some point during the medieval period, possibly during the Ottoman incursions, and remained unoccupied for centuries. In 1993, a Georgian monk named Maxim Kavtaradze climbed the pillar for the first time. He began restoring the ruins and eventually took up permanent residence on the summit. According to interviews published by the BBC and National Geographic, Maxim initially used a rope ladder to ascend and descend. A metal ladder was later installed along one face of the pillar, partially funded by the Georgian Orthodox Church. The living conditions are minimal. The dwelling has no running water, no electricity. Supplies are brought by volunteers who climb the ladder. Maxim descends roughly twice a week to interact with a small monastic community that is formed at the base of the pillar. The pillar itself is composed of Cretaceous limestone, roughly 100 million years old. According to geological analysis, it is a remnant of a much larger limestone formation that has been eroded away over millions of years, leaving the pillar as an isolated tower. A man looked at a 40-meter pillar of rock with ruins on top that had been abandoned for centuries, climbed it with a rope, and decided to live there. No electricity, no plumbing, no company. Just a church, a cell, and a view that most people will never see. He has been there for over 2 decades. When asked why, his answer has been consistent: to be closer to God. The distance is 40 meters, straight up. Number 5. Takasugi-on Tea House, Chino, Nagano Prefecture, Japan. In the city of Chino in Nagano Prefecture, roughly 200 kilometers northwest of Tokyo, there is a tea house that sits on top of 2 living chestnut trees. Not built around the trees, not supported by concrete poured around the trunks. The entire structure rests on 2 tree trunks that rise roughly 6 meters from the ground, with the tea house perched at the top like a bird's nest designed by an architect who had stopped caring about building codes. The structure sways in the wind. The trees are alive. The roots are in the ground. And the tea house has no foundation other than the trees themselves. The tea house was designed and built by architect Terunobu Fujimori, a professor of architecture at the University of Tokyo and one of Japan's most unconventional builders. According to Fujimori's own published writings, the name Takasugi-on translates roughly as a tea house built too high. He chose the name deliberately. Fujimori selected 2 chestnut trees growing on property belonging to his family. The trees were trimmed but not killed. The tea house was constructed on top of them using traditional Japanese woodworking techniques, without nails in the primary joints. Access is by a freestanding ladder that leans against one of the trunks. According to structural analysis discussed in the Japan Architect Journal, the design relies entirely on the living trees for vertical support. Lateral stability, the resistance to tipping, is provided by the natural flexibility of the trunks, which absorb wind loads by bending rather than resisting. In strong winds, the tea house moves visibly. The interior is a traditional Japanese tea room, small enough for 2 or 3 people, with a low ceiling, tatami mats, and a window that frames a view of the surrounding mountains. Fujimori has stated that the experience of drinking tea in a room that is moving gently with the wind transforms the ritual into something that no ground-level tea room can replicate. A professor of architecture at one of the most prestigious universities in the world built a tea house on top of 2 trees, named it Too High, and serves tea to guests who must climb a ladder and sit in a room that moves with the wind. The trees are the foundation, the wind is the furniture, and the architect's explanation for why he built it is the most honest answer on this list, because he wanted to know what it felt like. What kind of person builds a house between boulders, on a rock pillar, glued to a cliff, on an island with no room to stand, on top of a 40-meter column, or in the canopy of a living tree? The next 4 make all of these look sensible. Number 4. Bishop Castle, Rye, San Isabel National Forest, Colorado, USA. In the San Isabel National Forest in southern Colorado, at an altitude of roughly 2,700 meters, roughly 9,000 feet, off a 2-lane mountain road that most maps do not bother to name, there is a castle. Not a replica, not a themed attraction, a castle. With towers, buttresses, a grand hall, a wrought iron dragon on the roof that breathes actual fire, and walls of hand-laid stone that rise over 50 meters, 165 feet, into the mountain air. One man built it. He has been building it for over 50 years. He is still building it. Jim Bishop began construction in 1969 at the age of 15, starting with a stone cottage on a plot of land his parents helped him purchase for $1,250. According to Bishop's own account, documented extensively by local media and by the Denver Post, he never hired a crew, never consulted an engineer, never filed an architectural plan, and never applied for a building permit. He taught himself stone masonry from library books. He welded the iron structures himself. He cut the timber from surrounding forest. Every stone in the castle was placed by his hands. The structure has grown continuously for over 5 decades, evolving from a small cottage into a multi-story complex with a grand ballroom, multiple towers connected by iron walkways, stained glass windows, and a metal dragon sculpture on the highest tower equipped with a propane burner that produces a jet of flame visible from the road below. The castle has been the subject of ongoing disputes with county and state authorities over building codes, permits, and liability. Bishop has refused all government oversight. According to reporting by the Colorado Springs Gazette, he has posted signs around the property declaring it a sovereign monument and warning officials that interference will not be tolerated. Despite the lack of formal engineering, the castle has survived over 50 Colorado winters, including heavy snow loads, high winds, and seismic activity. According to a structural assessment discussed in a 2019 feature by Atlas Obscura, the stone walls are significantly over-engineered by conventional standards, likely because Bishop, lacking formal training, erred on the side of making everything thicker and heavier than necessary. A teenager started building a castle in the mountains with no plan, no training, and no permission. 50 years later, it has towers, a dragon, a ballroom, and walls thicker than most professional buildings. He never stopped. He never explained the design because there is no design. He builds what he feels like building, and what he feels like building is a castle. The authorities have tried to intervene. The mountain does not care, and neither does Jim Bishop. Number 3. Falling Water, Mill Run, Stewart Township, Pennsylvania, USA. In the forested hills of southwestern Pennsylvania, roughly 110 kilometers southeast of Pittsburgh, there is a house that is considered one of the greatest achievements in the history of architecture. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the most celebrated American architect of the 20th century. It was completed in 1939. It appears on the National Register of Historic Places. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 2019. It has been structurally failing since the day it was finished. Fallingwater was designed to cantilever over a waterfall on Bear Run, a mountain stream on the property of the Kaufman family. The concrete terraces extend horizontally from the hillside, hovering over the waterfall without visible support from below. The design was revolutionary. The engineering was, according to the people who had to build it, terrifying. According to structural engineer Robert Silman, whose firm was hired to assess and repair Fallingwater in the 1990s, Wright's original design underestimated the load on the cantilevered terraces. The contractor, Walter Hall, was so concerned about the structural calculations that he quietly added extra steel reinforcement to the first-floor cantilever without Wright's knowledge. Wright was furious when he found out. Hall's instinct was correct. Even with the additional reinforcement, the cantilevers began to deflect, sagging downward, almost immediately after the formwork was removed. According to Silman's published analysis, the main terrace deflected roughly 17 centimeters, almost 7 inches, from its intended position within the first few years. By the 1990s, the deflection had progressed to the point where structural failure was a genuine risk. Silman's firm designed a post-tensioning system, threading steel cables through the concrete and tightening them to pull the terraces back toward their original position. The repair cost over $11 million. According to Silman, without the intervention, the terraces would have eventually collapsed into the waterfall below. The Kaufman family knew about the structural problems almost immediately. Edgar Kaufman Jr. later described living in the house as an experience punctuated by anxiety. Cracks appeared in the concrete. Water leaked through the terraces during rain. The sound of the waterfall, which Wright intended as a meditative feature, was, according to the family, relentless and eventually oppressive. The most famous house in American architecture was structurally unsound from the day it was built. The contractor knew it. He added steel behind the architect's back. The architect was angry. The contractor was right. And the house that was supposed to float over a waterfall spent 80 years slowly falling toward it, saved only by $11 million worth of steel cables threaded through concrete that was never strong enough for the vision it was asked to hold. Number 2. Winchester Mystery House, San Jose, California, USA. In the heart of San Jose, California, surrounded by modern suburban development, there is a mansion with 161 rooms, 40 staircases, 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, 2,000 doors, and 10,000 windows. It was built continuously, without interruption, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 38 years. There was never an architect. There was never a master plan. There was never a blueprint. And some of the staircases lead directly into the ceiling. The house was built by Sarah Winchester, the widow of William Wirt Winchester, whose fortune came from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Following the deaths of her infant daughter in 1866 and her husband in 1881, Sarah reportedly sought counsel from a spiritualist medium who told her that she was haunted by the ghosts of everyone killed by Winchester rifles, and that the only way to appease them was to build continuously, never stopping construction for as long as she lived. According to historical research compiled by the Winchester Mystery House Preservation Foundation, Sarah purchased an 8-room farmhouse in 1886 and immediately began expanding it. Construction continued without pause until her death on September 5, 1922. Workers operated in shifts around the clock. At its peak, the construction employed roughly 20 carpenters full-time. The result defies architectural logic. Doors open onto blank walls. Staircases ascend 7 steps, then descend 11. Windows are built into interior floors, looking down into rooms below. A chimney rises 4 stories, but stops short of the roof. Hallways narrow to a width that only a child could pass through. Some rooms were built, sealed off, and built over, creating hidden spaces within the structure that were not discovered until decades after Sarah's death. According to architectural historians who have studied the house, including analysis published by the Smithsonian Institution, there is no discernible structural logic to the layout. Additions were made in every direction, at every scale, with no apparent concern for symmetry, function, or coherence. Some rooms are elaborately finished with imported wallpaper and Tiffany glass windows. Adjacent rooms are plain, unfinished, and appear to have been abandoned mid-construction. The house was severely damaged by the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The top 3 stories collapsed. Sarah sealed off the damaged sections and continued building in other directions rather than repairing what had fallen. The sealed sections remain inaccessible to this day. A woman built a house every single day for 38 years because she believed the dead demanded it. No blueprint, no logic, no stopping. The result is a structure that makes no sense because it was never meant to make sense. It was meant to never end, and it only ended because she did. Number 1. Huashan Cliffside Path Dwellings, Huashan, Shaanxi Province, China. And now, the house at the end of a path that most people cannot finish. Mount Huashan is one of China's 5 sacred mountains. It rises roughly 2,160 meters, about 7,087 feet, above sea level in Shaanxi Province, roughly 120 kilometers east of Xi'an. Millions of pilgrims and tourists visit every year. Most take a cable car to the upper stations. A smaller number climb the stone staircases carved into the mountain over centuries. And a much smaller number attempt the Changkong Zhandao, the plank road in the sky. The plank road is a path consisting of wooden boards, roughly 30 centimeters, about 12 inches, wide, bolted horizontally into the vertical face of the cliff. The path runs along the south peak of Huashan at an altitude of roughly 2,000 meters. Below the boards, there is nothing. A vertical drop of several hundred meters to the rocks and forest at the base. Hikers attach themselves to a fixed chain anchored into the rock face using a harness and carabiner. They shuffle sideways along the planks, pressing their backs against the cliff, looking out across empty air. The planks creak underfoot. The chains are worn smooth by thousands of hands. In places, the boards are spaced apart with gaps that reveal the drop below. According to the Huashan Mountain Scenic Area Management and historical records from Shaanxi Province, the original plank road was built roughly 700 years ago during the Yuan dynasty. It was constructed by Taoist monks as a path to small temples and meditation chambers carved into the cliff face at locations inaccessible by any other route. Those chambers are still there, cut into the rock at the far end of the plank road, accessible only by completing the traverse. There are small stone rooms with carved shrines, some barely large enough for a single person to sit. Taoist hermits lived in these chambers for extended periods, meditating in rooms carved into a cliff face that can only be reached by walking across boards bolted to a vertical wall of rock above a drop that would be fatal from any point along the path. The planks have been replaced multiple times. The current boards are reinforced with steel brackets. Safety harnesses were not part of the original path. For centuries, monks made the crossing with no protection of any kind, carrying supplies to their cliff-face dwellings on their backs, along boards wide enough for 1 foot at a time. According to climbing guides and historical accounts compiled by the Huashan Cultural Heritage Office, at least 100 people are estimated to have died on the mountain's various paths historically, though the plank road specifically has had no recorded fatalities since modern safety systems were installed. The temples at the end of the plank road were not built in the cliff because the monks wanted an impressive location. According to Taoist philosophy documented in period texts, isolation from the world was essential for spiritual cultivation. The cliff face offered the ultimate isolation, a home that no one could reach by accident, no one could visit without intention, and no one could enter without confronting the reality that a single mistake on the path meant death. A house carved into a cliff face 2,000 meters above the ground, at the end of a path made of wooden boards 30 centimeters wide, bolted to a vertical rock wall above a drop that would kill you several times over. Built by monks who wanted to be alone badly enough to make sure that the only people who could visit were the ones willing to walk a plank across the sky to do it. The most impossible house on this list is not impossible because of how it was built. It is impossible because of what you have to do to get to the front door. And for the monks who lived there, that was the entire point. A village under boulders that have not moved in 8 centuries. A palace growing from a rock pillar. A temple hanging from beams in a cliff for 1,500 years. A house that is an island. A monk on a 40-meter column. A tea house on 2 living trees. A castle built by one man for 50 years. A masterpiece that has been falling apart since day one. A mansion built for ghosts for 38 years. And a home you can only reach by walking across boards bolted to the sky. Which one would you live in? Which one would you refuse to enter? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe so the next impossible building reaches you. We will see you there.